Welcome. We're going to take a look at budgeting in non-manufacturing companies. Note that all kinds of companies will prepare budgets. Your merchandiser or retailer will prepare a budget. Service companies, such as engineers, will prepare budgets, and not-for-profit organizations will prepare budgets. Not-for-profit organizations, in fact, will record their budget on their books, so they have a very different process, and it becomes very important. But that's beyond the scope of this class. We're going to turn our focus to the merchandiser. They use a merchandise purchases budget, and this will replace production, direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead budgets that the manufacturer prepares. And that's, of course, because they buy and resell inventory. Let's look at an example. Samaritan Inc. is a retailer with the following expected sales for the first quarter of next year. January sales $100,000, February sales $150,000, March sales $160,000, April sales $200,000. So they've given us sales in dollars, not units. Then they tell us cost of sales is 75% of the sales price, and the company plans to continue last year's policy, which required ending merchandise inventory to be equal to 50% of the following month's sales activity. Compute merchandise purchases for each month, show the quarterly total. Now, before we leave this page, note that when we buy inventory, it's going to be at cost. That's what we're going to pay our supplier. So our purchases are going to be at 75% of the sales prices shown for each of those months. Also note that we do want to have ending inventory, and we have beginning inventory because we're continuing last year's policy. All right, so we're going to do this for each month and then have a quarterly total. So I'll set up a column for January, a column for February, a column for March, and then a quarterly total. Now, when you're thinking about what to buy as a retailer, you certainly want to be able to meet projected sales for each month. So what we'll do first is convert sales to cost for each month. Sales at cost. For January, sales are expected to be $100,000. So at cost, that would be 75% of $100,000. That's $75,000. This is essentially the same thing as cost of goods sold. So sales at cost, cost of goods sold, same thing. In February, we project sales to be $150,000. So when we convert that to cost, it's 75% of $150,000, or $112,500. Likewise, for March, we expect sales to be $160,000, and we'll take 75% of that to convert it to cost. That's $120,000. So total sales at cost, or total cost of goods sold, will be $307,500. Now what we need to do is determine if we want to end with any inventory and if we'll have beginning inventory. And the answer to both of those questions is yes. The company wants to have half of what they're going to sell the following month at the end of each month. So we'll add desired ending inventory. So at the end of January, we want to have half of what we're going to sell in February. So that's 75% of February sales of $150,000. We know that's $112,500, and we want half of that. So desired ending inventory is $56,250, which again is half of the $112,500 of sales at cost. For February, we want to end with half of what we need for March's sales. We expect to sell $160,000 in March at cost. That's $120,000, and we want half of that. So we want to end with $60,000 of inventory in February. Then in March, we're going to have to look ahead to April's sales. Those were given in the problem to be $200,000. So at cost, 75% of $200,000 times 50%. So at cost, it's $150,000, and we want half of that. So ending inventory in March is $75,000. Now at the end of the quarter, your ending inventory will be what you end March with. It will be $75,000. When you have inventories, it's not additive for all 3 months. You will end what you end the last month with. Now we need to subtract our beginning inventories. So recall, the company is continuing a policy of ending with half of what they need for the following month. So at the end of December or the beginning of January, you would have had half of what you need for January's sales. So remember, January's sales are $100,000. 75% of that is cost of sales is $75,000, and then you want half of it. So we'll begin January with half of what we need for January sales, or $37,500. Now for the other months, we don't really have to compute the beginning inventory, because what we end January with is what we'll begin February with. And what we end February with is what we'll begin March with. Now we have to determine the inventory at the beginning of the quarter. The first month of the quarter is January, and when you're talking about inventories, again, you cannot add across. You have to determine what amount would be shown at the beginning of the quarter. Hopefully you said that would be January, $37,500. Right now we can compute our purchases. In January, our purchases need to be $93,750. In February, $116,250. And in March, $135,000. So purchases for the quarter, $345,000. Now this is useful information to the purchasing agent, whoever does the buying for the company. It's of course also going to affect accounts payable and ultimately cash. So this is an important budget for a retailer. That concludes our coverage of budgeting for a retailer. The other budgets are the same as what we've covered for the manufacturer. So the key thing to remember for the retailer is that if you're given sales at the sales price, you will need to convert it to cost, because we buy our inventory at cost and then sell it for a higher price. All right, work your homework problems, and you've also got another problem later in the lecture notes that deals with the retailer, and work through that and bring questions to class. See you then.